Man, you know when sometimes you schedule videos to be out like the day after an event, and then you're somehow looking at Thursday and you're like, well, that's the earliest I could have done. I don't know, man. I had a whole schedule of like 2 videos a day, and then I kind of realized that there's no realistic way to do this with everything else going on. So yeah, so uploads are gonna get slightly, instead of 2 videos a day, down to 1 video a day, which is still pretty insane when I think about it, especially considering the fact that I used to do 2 videos a week in the past. God damn. Thank you for your understanding. All the Overdress decks are being profiled, don't you worry about it. There's still lots of stuff coming. But today, let's talk about BSFO premiums. Of course, we had that event last weekend on the Sunday. This weekend, we have the standard as well as the V premium one coming up just in a few days. Me and Kai will be commentating the AO as well as EU regions once again, and then passing out and then doing it again for day 2. And then on the NA stream, we'll have Peter as well as JJ do it as well. So it's going to be a really hype show with a lot of cool things to see. For Overdress is the first big event, and then for V premium, this is like the first big event since like, I don't know, I want to say since like Luard meta or something. Like I think the last time we had one was in Japan. It was basically one of like the VMCs or something like that. But in the English side, we haven't had anything since Worlds basically, which is pretty insane to think about. So I'm really glad that we finally have big competitive events with results. And speaking of results, let's talk about the results from the premium ones from all 3 regions. Also big old thank you to the man himself, Maxime Solemn the Vanguard. You know, props to him. He sent me his little pie charts because it's a pain in the ass to make these. So I do appreciate him helping to reduce my amount of work for this weekend. So of course, let's talk about the results and kind of make some conclusions about it. A lot of people have been making their videos about what they want to see in the restriction list, and I'll kind of make my point here as well. But it generally matches what everyone else is saying. I think the stream made it pretty obvious which of these decks are definitely problematic and which ones need to go. So I think for the most part, this will be pretty clear for a lot of people. Generally speaking, for me in premium, I really like, that's especially why I like tier 2 premium, is because tier 2 premium for the most part is basically surrounded by decks where their turn 3, like their first try turn, is all about setup. So it's like setup, farming, you know, drawing cards, but not pushing for game yet. And then usually turn 4 is like push for game, or maybe turn 5 even, right? I think that those slower metas for premium are much nicer because it also gives time for both players' decks to actually show what they're capable of, because we saw a lot of people talk about their decks from this event and say like, oh, I can't play that many cards or like that many techs in my list because I won't see them, and I need to only play cards that are necessary to survive on turn 3 or win on turn 3. And I don't like that, and I think a lot of people don't like that. I think premium is like in a problematic state right now. That being said, there's still plenty of cool decks, and I think that it was insanely fun to watch all those games on the actual BSFO stream. And you know, both me and Kai had a great time commentating over those games as well. But I think for a lot of people, the format needs to slow down a really huge ton. And it's kind of funny how like in Worlds last year as well, or 2 years ago at this point, we were also saying like, yeah, you know, things need to slow down a bit, but instead they just like accelerated by a billion. And you know, we found that in a lot of other formats, the moment they slow down, they become much better. V premium right now is in a state of much slower play than it used to be back in the Gurgrid meta, simply because you can actually play and it's like goes back and forth, you know, many turns and stuff. And then of course Overdress standard is also like, the turns are pretty quick, but it takes a lot of turns to get through the game, right? A lot of back and forth, like turn 6, 7, 8, you know, it really takes a while to get through things. And I think that people want premium to also slow down to that level, and then that way we'll have like 4 amazing ways to enjoy competitive Vanguard, you know, 0 included. So I think that that's kind of like my baseline for all this. But let's take a look at results, right? So of course, here's the pie chart for the AO region. So this was the first one that happened. And we can see, of course, here, you know, 3 Blade Masters right off the bat. This was by far the region that had the most like Blade Master dominators, let's say. It definitely like showed that there's 2 different builds. There's the vanilla one, and then there's the non-vanilla one that runs just like more G units in general. Runs a lot of like techs and like denial griffins, and just in general a lot of ways to like combat the stuff that your opponent can do and also win the mirror match. It's kind of what we saw in the finals, is that the person that was ready to win the mirror actually won the entire thing. So that's another big thing about it. Fenrir, of course, the loop version with Kazande and everything, was played by Toby. Really well done. I think he ended in top 4. So that deck is also, you know, another loop deck that can just like go infinite on turn 3 or turn 4. It's pretty nasty, and the fact that it can do it on turn 3 is also insane. Then going up, we have Nuadayo. Of course, Hyuga came up in all of these events, I think, because it's just such a strong deck with very little ways to deny what it wants to do. And as much as players try to actually like combat it, you know, like Honolulu is the best you can do, but then they bot deck it with Hyuga, and then it's just like, well, man, like that's honestly also problematic. One Gastil, man, Gastil was all kinds of emotions this weekend as well. We've seen the Brufas variant become really popular lately because you basically get to one-shot your opponent if you get the entire Gastile effect off. And, you know, sometimes if you don't respect that, you do lose games because you didn't go for that more like greedy play, I guess. Of course, Luard is still up in here. I think Luard is a deck that a lot of people consider to be like pretty cool. It might need a slap on the wrist with stuff like Bende, but for the most part, it's a deck that definitely, like, if it wasn't for that jump that Bende allows you to do, it's a deck that does take its time to farm up and then go in for game, you know, or try to push for game with Morfessa and everything. And then, of course, Harry, that was played by Derek Dow. We saw more Harry players over the weekend, but, you know, the Harry list was pretty insane to watch because it really had an insane level of skill needed to pilot it correctly. And so seeing Derek actually do that time and time again, you know, deny the Blade Master tokens, deny the infinite attacks and everything, and just basically come through with, I mean, multi-attacks, and like, honestly, that's basically what wins games, right? The multi-attacks are what wins games, but the thing that makes his deck stand out is the fact that he can deny these loop decks pretty easily. So we can already see, you know, some of these sort of like problem children from this pie chart already. You know, we have Blade Master, Fenrir, Nuadayo, as well as Gastile are like the decks that I think a lot of people see as problems, whereas the other two that snuck into top 8 are more so seen as like the more like this is what premium can be like, except for Luard that needs to kind of lose that Bende jump up engine, and that's about it. Then in Europe things kind of switched up, so you can see here Gastile at 2 times, Fenrir at 2 times, Nuadayo and of course Blade Master is still in here, but so the decks we talked about earlier are still up in here, but of course now in even greater quantities. And of course Gastile was a pretty big one just because, you know, we saw, like, again, we saw that really heartbreaking top 4 match as well. Fenrir showed us a different variant that Mohammed played as well, the more control variant, which I think the control variant is actually pretty alright, at least compared to the loop. Like, if we're to compare it to the loop, it's pretty okay. It's just that the loop is so nasty because of what it can do, whereas this one was more so just like Gleipnir restand, you know, swing with a bunch of crits, that kind of thing. But the two like really interesting decks, of course, from this was the Grand Blue deck that Solemn played himself. You know, it was really interesting to watch. I think that Grand Blue and Premium is generally like a very interesting deck because of the level of things it can do. And then Messiahs were another cool one where we saw it actually like kind of do amazingly in the earlier rounds and then kind of struggle once it got to the tops, but still really cool deck. We saw quite a few Link Jokers pop up here and there, you know, not just this one, but there was also Chaos, you know, that we saw at some point. And the deck just has some interesting tools that can win some matchups pretty easily. And then finally the NA one, this is the only one that I didn't watch entirely. I watched until like round 4 and then I just passed out because I was way too drained from the last 2 regions. So we saw here like 2 Harry lists. Once again, this was Derek Dow up in here as well. So, you know, Harry basically showing that because it has the power to counter the meta, it can actually show up at the top tables. You know, the Fenrir, of course, still at the top because of how easily it can win these games if you know how to do the loop. Nuadayo consistently in every single region at the top. But here we saw some more interesting stuff, right? The Overlord list. Overlord is definitely still a great deck. A lot of people tend to forget about it, you know, how good this is. We all focus on Blade Master, which for once is absent from this top 8, but, you know, Overlord is still really good, but I think it's not like too good to the point that it's like Blade Master levels of crazy. And, you know, Kagero just as a whole has the like power of having Denial Griffin that makes it stand out and be able to win some of these terrible matchups. Then Hanzo and Nightmare Dolls to me were just like, I know Nightmare Dolls are quite good in Premium. I've seen them played quite a few times and it's very, very difficult and high skill level. Hanzo for me was actually pretty interesting. I didn't really see any gameplay of that deck in Premium whatsoever, and I was quite surprised to see it come out at the top, but I mean, if it works out, it works out, and I can't wait to see the VOD later on to see how this deck actually played. So those are the actual results, right? But what can we kind of conclude from this? I think, you know, for a lot of people, it's pretty obvious that Blade Master is a nuts deck that can essentially just go off without any kind of counterplay. That's kind of the problem for me, is also that like some of these decks, all you can really do against them to reduce their consistency, not even turn off their plays, but reduce their consistency, this being like Conroe searching for Zazan basically in Blade Master, is that you just have to draw, ride, pass, not even attack anything, right? Because otherwise you just get blown up, right? If you risk attacking and hitting or anything, it's crazy, right? So I don't like those kind of metas. I really don't enjoy that myself either, when it's just like straight down to passing and like, you know, there's barely any ways to even underswing because everything plays like low numbers, etc, etc. But the big thing is definitely like these loops are problematic. Like Blade Master is a problematic deck. It's just crazy that it even like the pop off it has is insane. And I've also seen the opposite spectrum, right? I've seen people go into Blade Master, check like one stand the entire turn, and then just like flop over and die the next turn to any deck because they don't have much cards in hand after that, and they basically just get blown up. But it's like that doesn't make it a fair deck either. Like the fact that it can whiff the stand triggers is not what makes it fair. Like this deck is crazy by all means. It has basically little to no counterplay unless you're playing something that can remove the vision token. Another deck that isn't even featured in here is Valkyrion, which can kind of do the same thing by keeping, like, to stand the Valkyrion over and over and over again and swing with those big attacks, and we saw that on stream quite a lot too. Like, Valkyrion is pretty problematic as well. Fenrir is also, like, if you don't play anything with removal in it, you just get kind of screwed over because this thing just like builds up to infinite power and then just like goes like, all right, I can do infinite power multiple times now. What can you do about that? Like, it even gets over trigger, which is like insane to think about because infinite can reach beyond that. I think Nuadayo is also like the deck that the moment we got the Stride revealed, a lot of people looked at it like, okay, this will be problematic because it's so easy for it to set up. It has the entire Hyuga engine to boot, and then in addition to that, it's like you're getting all these multi-attacks, the guard restrict, and it's just like, you know, we saw it win the European Championship, and because of that, it was pretty clear why this deck is so insane. You could literally like play out of any situation. You know, it's not just Nuadayo, like Shibaraku Victor, I believe it's called, is like also the Stride that actually finished that game and won the entire championship. So it's a really cool card, you know, to see that that is actually like a way to extend those attacks. And it's a cool interaction, but not in the form of Hyuga, right? Hyuga, I feel like, is just such a hard deck to kind of like dance around because when there's so little counterplay because of cards like Hoam, and the deck pops off so much once given even one counterblast, it's just crazy to think about like what kind of potential it can even have. So yeah, it's honestly like there's a lot of those like big problem decks, but I think a lot of it boils down to like these decks pop off on turn 3, not even giving you time to farm, and like the playstyle is so quick that doesn't give time for decks appropriately to shine. Gastile I can say the same thing about too, because, you know, Gastile is also just like, well, here I go, I'm gonna do a full combo turn of just like farming a bunch of soul, get up to 20, and now I'm gonna 0 to 6 you, right? All these decks are just like 0 to 6, 0 to 6, 0 to 6. It's not really a fun environment to play in. You know, knowing the fact that you start playing against a deck and knowing that it can just 0 to 6 you just like that is definitely not the best feeling. And that being said, you know, it's crazy, like I'm saying all these things, but there are a lot of really fun decks in Premium, and I enjoy really experimenting in Premium when I have the time for it, but it'd be much more welcoming but it would also be really nice if it would just be possible to know that even when I go to a tournament with a deck like this, you know, that I just personally enjoy really like a lot, like Dimension Police, for example, I don't have to worry about something like Blade Master just randomly blowing me up, right? I'm sitting on grade 2, I went second, and this deck just explodes on me, right? Right now in the other formats, like there's still in the V Premium format, still a bit of a going first priority, but nowhere near as much as it used to be, whereas it feels like it went completely into Premium, where going first is very much almost everything, because these decks just ride up and swing. It's not even a matter of like who can stride first anymore. Blade Master doesn't stride, period. It simply just goes into itself. Nuadayo dances around the rule entirely, so it's just like striding first doesn't even matter much anymore, even though it's the key mechanic of this entire format. And so that's just kind of crazy to think about. So yeah, I think the other content creators have also made really good videos about what needs to be hit, what needs to be, like, you know, neutered. There's plenty of decks that didn't show up in here, like Songstar Loop, that I think definitely needs to be addressed as well. So honestly, ModiP, the Vanguard team over at Bushiroad, please make sure you look at the Premium format, because I think this BSFO gave you a really good impression of what's going on, and I think that especially the game shown on stream kind of showed off two sides of the coin. You know, one thing was that it showed off all these decks and how crazy they are and how like unfun they can make the format, but at the same time we saw people bring some of their craziest spice, you know, to counter those decks, which is also like the nice part of Premium. But that will exist in Premium no matter what the meta is, right? People will always be trying to bring their crazy spice to counter a format, but the format doesn't need to be the way it is now, you know, for that to exist. We can have a healthier format and people will still bring their spice. You'll still see stuff like Harry, you know, we saw like Dimension Police players here and there. We saw that one Eradicator player, I think, in one of the rounds. You know, we've seen Vanquishers. There's so many cool things that we can explore in Premium, but we don't need a meta like this for that to stay. Like, just because these decks get hit doesn't mean that people's creativity will end and that people will suddenly just like stop trying to like outplay the meta and like try to conquer the meta with their own ideas. That will still very much continue, but in a much more healthy environment. So yeah, that was my discussion on BSFO Premium. Definitely, I think it's a lot more like less of a like look at, you know, this kind of objective results, how I like to do, and a lot more like I wanted to get my thoughts out on the format itself and like the way that the meta's been lately. So I really hope to see some hits. You know, I think you guys should also watch Solemn's video on what he thinks needs to be hit, Kai's as well. Really, just everyone's been making amazing videos about this topic, but for me, I've been kind of really busy preparing for the BSFO weekend coming up, so it's not been as much time to do that. So definitely give love to the other guys as well, because they definitely deserve it, and I look forward to what kind of maintenance they'll do in Premium going forward. And I'm super hyped to see how things will turn out for Standard and V Premium. Anyway, y'all, thank you so much for watching. If you liked the video, drop a like. If you want to sub, drop a sub. You know, we're still trying to reach 45k to use Great Daisha's effect. You know, Daikaiser got revealed and we still haven't been able to achieve Great Daisha's effect. Man, I don't wanna face my man without being able to use Great Daisha's effect when his own skill text says we're supposed to do it. So, man, if y'all could just help out, that'd be really great. Anyway, enough joking around. Y'all take it easy, take care, stay safe, and I'll see you guys next time. Bye-bye.